Badlands, run into Badlands, explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's Breaking History, where we are pre-recording once more due to some crazy schedules on both of our parts. So forgive us if certain world-changing events happened after our recording that we may not have picked up on. We didn't know, but we will be talking about some earth-changing events that are definitely happening as we speak. Currently, it is the first day of the BRICS summit, so there's going to be a lot to talk about. And a lot's going on all over the world. There's some really good breakthroughs in a positive way. Gordon, how you doing, man?
I'm good, Matt. I'm good. How are you? Dude, so much has happened in the past, 5 days, 3 days, 4 days. So much has happened. It's impossible to cover it all on the show anyway. Also, shout out to myself because I'm live right now as we are doing this on Badlands Daily. So hello to myself, and hopefully I'm smart enough to remember to raid over here from Badlands Daily. So I'm live. I'm live right now on 2 different shows on Badlands. I'm pretty sure at this exact moment.
You are blowing my mind. Well, that being said, let's do this. Before we launch into any of our usual content, let's set the stage with a word from today's sponsor, Goldco, who I'll just run right now. We'll read it and then we'll jump into it. Over the next few weeks, it's election day every day, and the stakes could not be higher. With so much uncertainty, there's never been a better time to buy gold and silver. Join the thousands of hardworking Americans taking proactive steps to safeguard their savings with our partners at Goldco. Goldco's products and services can offer you a peace of mind that comes from knowing that your hard-earned assets are securely invested. With over 10 years of experience, our partners at Goldco have been established as a top-rated precious metals company and a leader in the gold industry. Goldco's buyback guarantee assures you that if your situation changes, they will repurchase your metals at the best price, providing you with the peace of mind. Head over to badlandsgold.com today, claim your free gold and silver kit, and see if you qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver. To see how much silver you get, visit instantsilver.com/badlands. That's Badlands Gold and instantsilver.com each /badlands to take control of your financial destiny. Okay.
Beautiful. Very well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So we have currently some major ruptures, obviously, as we've been discussing in previous weeks. There's something left unresolved from the approach taken in 2008, 2009 to the blowout of the financial system. The entire time bomb of derivatives, the everything bubble, as some have called it, started to burst. Instead of dealing with the systemic crisis, what we saw was just insane money printing, quantitative easing, fake regulations that only increase the size and virulence of the over-the-counter derivatives, which now represent something like 80 times more than the world GDP totally. It's all fictitious capital. It's all speculative debt based on securitized, impossible to pay, unlegitimate debts that are otherwise junk bonds that have been insured upon, gambled upon, bundled, and then multiplied several times over. So the whole thing's a fraud. It's a time bomb. And now we're 15, 16 years later. It's rupturing in a heavy way. We're going to get a new system. There is a fight, and there has been a fight now over what that new system is going to look like. Will it be based upon sovereign nation states, or will it be based upon a death cult wanting to control the terms of that new system? That's the nature of the fight. And on that note, the BRICS summit, the 16th BRICS summit, has happened. It is underway as of this morning, as we're speaking on the 22nd. It began. Putin is obviously totally isolated. All of the CNN propaganda and BBC has definitely been confirmed that he's isolated. Did anybody share? What do you think of this, Gordon? What do you think about what's going on? What are we expecting to see in the BRICS summit? Why is this important? What's your take on it?
Oh yeah. Putin is totally isolated. I was laughing to myself as you said that. I'm trying to pull this video up real quick of of like people arriving. This is a rock star event. It's incredible what's happening in Kazan right now. Let me see if I can.
Until then, here's the little list while you're looking for the actual video. Just a quick list of some of the actual heads of state that I just found. Somebody sent this to me this morning. That have officially confirmed that will be there on the first day. You got Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi, Lula da Silva actually got in a weird accident. He couldn't come last minute. That was weird.
Yeah, he's a brain hemorrhage apparently. Hit his head.
Yeah, that's shady. Timing's
shady.
too perfect. Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, the president of Iran, the president of the UAE, El Sisi of Egypt, the prime minister of Ethiopia, Erdogan, Lukashenko of Belarus, the Armenian Soros bitch who whatever was found himself being pulled in there, the president of Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Bolivia, Congo, Laos, and that's just a few. I mean, we've got still like 38 other countries that are being represented as far as having heads of state there. I don't know exactly how many in total, but it's quite something. And it's the first time you've had a BRICS summit with all 10 countries. As of last year, this went from 5 to 10 countries, and there's a big waiting list of many other countries desirous to get on board. I know Turkey officially made their interest well known, and they're a NATO member earlier, just a couple of, I think 2 months ago, not even a month and a half ago. I know you had Bangladesh before they got destabilized. I don't know how that's going now, but they were definitely on the waiting list. Algeria, there's many other countries. I think even Hungary is toying around with the idea, though I don't know how possible that is under the current configuration of the EU. But that being said, there's a lot of nations waiting to join, a lot of African countries too. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. But what do you? So what's your take overall? And if you can't find the video at the moment, basically it's probably a video of Putin just basically meeting every single head of state.
Yeah, it's just I will pull up the video. But you got me thinking, so I wanted to pull something else up. Pakistan. There's a number of countries that are going to be looking to join BRICS. Turkey's really the big one, and the reason that Turkey is the big one is because Turkey is a key member of both, at this point, both NATO and the EU. They're not technically, I think, a full member of the EU, but they are like a partial member of the EU, or like an observer, or a candidate. I think they became a candidate back in. It's all very bureaucratic and stupid, but I think like in 1997 they became like a candidate for the EU membership. And it was funny because back then they were kind of trying to pivot away from the Middle East and towards Europe, and now it's like they're trying to pivot away from the Europe and back towards Asia because Europe is a dumpster fire. But the other really big country that I think is the one to keep the eye on is Pakistan. That's not a country that I think a lot of people think of when they think of, like major economic output or influence. But I wrote about this in the news brief today. So last week we had, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is something you put on my radar. And that's kind of like almost like the counterpart to BRICS. I mean, not BRICS, to NATO. It's almost like in some ways it doesn't operate. It's not designed the way NATO is designed.
Yeah, there's no collective security pact necessarily. It's not as militaristically virulent, but yeah,
NATO is a military alliance. The SCO is not. The SCO is really more about like an economic partnership, from what I can tell. But so they had their big summit last week in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. And I was writing about, and you remember last week we talked about like the allegations the Washington Post were throwing out there about India and about how like Modi was killing these Sikh guys in Canada, and now Canada and India have like ended their diplomatic relations. And it seemed like they're trying to foment a war or foment a conflict between Pakistan and India. They don't want Pakistan and India making amends. India being a core member, a founding member of BRICS, Pakistan wanting to join BRICS, seems like to me, logically, you'd want to see those two countries. They're going to need to figure out a way to get along if they're going to work together in BRICS. So last week I posited, at the time there was no plan for these two countries before this the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit. There was no plans for them to have a bilateral meeting. And so I said before the summit began, let's keep an eye on this because something might happen here that changes that. Well, we got this. And it's a little trivial, it's a little superficial, but I think there's a lot more to it than it seems. So this is an article from the Indian Express, talking about the key takeaways from the SEO summit. The number one story, it seems, is that India and Pakistan they did end up having a bilateral meeting between the prime ministers, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Prime Minister of India. And just to set the stage, as we discussed last week, probably you're talking about a conflict that goes back centuries, maybe thousands of years, maybe one of the oldest conflicts in human history, because it certainly seems to predate, from what I can tell, the creation of Islam. It seems like it's not just a religious dispute, but a cultural dispute over territory. So the prime ministers of India and the prime minister of Pakistan, they meet. They spoke twice in the same day, in less than 24 hours, and there were a number of ideas that were discussed. But the thing that was solidified was that they're going to start playing cricket against one another again, which hasn't happened in a very long time, apparently. So Pakistan and India are now going to start hosting like a cricket match. And some people are going to say, well, that's just sports. Like, who cares about sports? But if you think about what that means, it means the two countries now have to cooperate on something, engage with one another, and organize something that is friendly competition, that's not political, it's not economic.
Yeah.
It's a way to bond and form partnerships. There's a reason that back in 2018, Donald Trump absolutely insisted that North Korea attend and participate in the Winter Olympics. And, what made that event, and that ended up happening, and what made that an even bigger deal is the fact that the Winter Olympics that year were being hosted in South Korea. So North Korea sent athletes to South Korea to participate in the Olympics, which they don't normally do.
Yeah.
And that was a big step towards normalizing relations between North Korea and the West and just the world in general.
Yeah.
And now we see where North Korea is now. So this is to me, this is a much bigger deal than I think people are going to make of it. And it's very positive.
Absolutely. And I'll just say one thing on this point you're bringing up regarding the important and underappreciated diplomacy of sport in general. I think this is a big reason why they went out of their way over the last few years, but especially this year, in sabotaging the Olympics. I think most people have probably seen some videos and imagery of the vast satanic occult imagery that was, shown to millions of screens around the world, ushering in the Olympics and then closing the Olympics with some weird demonological UFO motifs, very Gnostic at the very end, closing the whole thing up as well. But they're pissing on the Last Supper, then they and basically twisted in the Apollo Dionysian feast. They had the bull's head of Mithra worship on display, assassins and Templar Baphomet imagery as well, carrying the torches with Snoop Dogg and the Sufi mystical order, or the Ismaili mystical order of the assassins as well, being represented by another church. So you had all of this stuff. And of course, Paris is a major ISIS cult that goes back to the Roman Empire. So you had all of this stuff, super anti-Christian. And then, they were just encouraging a wokeism. They're forcing swimmers to swim in the polluted Seine River and vomit their guts out.
Yeah, they all got sick. Got sick. Yeah.
I think there was an intention to consciously destroy the Olympics, because after they've isolated, they kicked out Russia, saying that Russia is no longer acknowledged. Then they basically figured they realized that this is something that humanizes other countries. It creates an idea of healthy competition, where you even start rooting potentially for the humanity and of other countries that also are trying to do their best and excel in gymnastics or whatever, right? And they can't allow that. They can only allow one sort of competition in our mind, which is the game theory, destroy the weak type of Darwinian idea of competition. That's okay. Anything that has to do with excellence, being the best you can be, that's not good. And so the Olympics, definitely they had to destroy. I think, to what you're saying here regarding the reemergence of sport between Pakistan and India. super duper important for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that video, for some reason I'm having trouble finding the one that I was looking at earlier, but I did find one that's actually better because it kind of shows multiple people arriving at once. But I mean, why does God, I this I'm logged into the wrong account on this browser that I'm using for the show, and so it like that's why it always says that my thing's suspended. And it's like you've reached your rate limit because you are a suspended account. So let me reshare my screen so I can do my window.
Okay.
But see window. Okay. All right. So let's do this. Is that appearing?
That is appearing.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure.
All right.
I'm gonna mute it. So we're looking at Modi up here. You got Xi Jinping right here. This is the South African, South African president, right here. And you can see like when Modi gets up here, he has these women who have these really tasty looking Russian treats. I mean Putin rolling out the Russian babes who have tasty Russian treats. I mean he really is just rubbing it in the face of the West, because if this was the West doing this, they would have like trannies out there, like doing weird stuff. And Putin is keeping it very classy, keeping it very traditional. I definitely dig it. You have I want to show a few more. You have Maduro. So Maduro is
Maduro showed up. That was good. Great.
Wonderful. Yeah. So here's Sisi, Sisi from Egypt. And then you have here's Xi and Putin. You have the president from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Congo, president from the Congo, who I've been talking a lot about the Congo lately because of everything going on there. You have Abbas from Palestine. You have here's Modi meeting with the president of Iran. Modi has been kind of a rock star there. He really is like in his element. He is flourishing right now in Kazan. We're definitely going to talk about this here in a minute.
Very curious.
Yep. And then here is Maduro.
Cool.
And some really interesting things just developing out of Venezuela. There's some narratives getting thrown out there right now that we don't necessarily need to get into on this show, but basically there are former CIA agents putting videos out now where they're like speaking into a camera and they're, spelling all their credentials out, and they're saying, here's how, credentialed I am, and now blaming the entire voting machine scandal on the cocaine cartels that operate out of Venezuela, and basically saying that Venezuela and Maduro is the reason that the election got stolen in 2020. And that's where it seems like they're going. They're going to try to pin the entire election theft apparatus, not on the CIA or like the deep state, but on Maduro and the cocaine cartels.
I love how they do that. It's amazing sleights of hand. It's like a magic trick where you think you're looking at something, then they just find a way of just reframing it, where all of a sudden the actual arsonist who burnt down your village is standing right there cheering on the mobs who have every reason to like lynch mob the arsonist, who's now leading them to go and attack the next village next door.
Yep.
It's quite something.
Oh, for sure. Two more quick little clips I'll show, and then we can discuss. Let me pull up. I wanted to show this one. This was a kind of a funny one. Is you had all of these guys listening to a Russian. Here it is. Listening like the Russian symphony.
Oh, I couldn't hear it though. I can't hear it.
Well, they're toe tapping along, like the Arabs are all toe tapping along to like the Russian ballet.
Really?
And, yeah. See.
But it's a very musical culture. It's good.
Oh yeah. But the most this is a really fascinating one. Julian Assange's father arriving in Kazan for the BRICS summit.
Oh wow. Huh.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of really, really interesting things happening in Kazan. Kazan, the world, it really does feel like the world is gathering in Kazan, and it feels like the West is on the outside looking in. That's what it feels like right now. It's like we are like the kid that didn't get invited to the party, and everyone else is at the party having a great time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that there's definitely a lot of discussion about de-dollarization, which is obviously going to accelerate. It's not a gradual linear process because nothing moves in a linear fashion when you're dealing with something like a boundary condition meltdown. You know, you can in a linear way, you can imagine a bubble gum expand, like a hubba bubble gum, linearly expanding second to second to second, getting bigger. But there's actually an invisible tension building up based on laws of physics, resulting in a hyperbolic acceleration at a certain point when you've passed a threshold around which that thing's going to blow. It's going to pop. And if you're not ready for it, it'll make a mess. So hopefully, I mean, that's the thing about human beings. We can act on future situations before preventatively in a good way. We know the oligarchy creates fake crises that they get us to preventatively carry out measures for, whether injecting ourselves or whether putting in green energy grids to prevent some future crisis of global warming. These are fake. The actual remedy that they're pushing is the worse than the problem that they're scaring us with. However, if we're using our brains, we can actually realize, no, there are real crises. There are droughts. It's in the Bible even, you know, like that there's the idea that we can foresee future droughts and preserve some of our grain every year instead of eating it all, so that when a foreseeable seasonal or cyclical drought should hit in 8 years or whatever, we won't all die or eat our legs. We'll have food reserves. So you can do the same thing with the bigger, the more you understand, the more you can act on the future. And similarly, I think that there's a big discussion that I've been seeing amongst Sergei Glaziev, amongst many, many leaders of Eurasia that have come around the BRICS, around what to do since the US dollar-based system is not conducive to human survival at the moment. It might become so if we're able to get patriots to recapture the US government and do some big reorganizations. The US dollar may become viable again, but that requires some big changes. But I know that there's definitely some discussions right now that we're seeing advancing regarding a new economic architecture, which is moving faster and faster into, like, there's already elements of it in place that are already carrying out transactions bilaterally between participating countries within the BRICS and broader system of associations. Do you want to say anything about where we're at there in terms of the alternative economic architecture? Or?
For sure. Yeah. So I think, and this is where I think BRICS to me is a huge white pill, and I think it's something to be very excited and optimistic about. There are people I've seen, like, in the movement, and by in the movement I mean like earnest people asking questions, just saying, like, should we be afraid of BRICS? Is BRICS going to be something that could, you know, eat our lunch and destroy the West? And here's the way that I look at it. You know, up until a few years ago, the entire world was dependent on the US dollar. The entire global economy was completely dependent on the US dollar because of the petrodollar. Every single country in the world was required to keep US currency as a reserve in order to purchase oil from OPEC. Likewise, once they started doing the quantitative easing, as you pointed out earlier, in 2008, the debt they started creating, the U.S. The Treasury started selling, or the Federal Reserve started selling all of our debt to these foreign countries because they were considered safe places to invest money. So it's like China, I think, had like $800 billion worth of U.S. Treasury bonds. You know, they're like low yield bonds, so you get a very small return on your investment, but they're safe. Like, they're like, you know, it's not a risky investment. So you had all these countries that were holding our debt, holding our current, like, you know, the currency debt. And then you also have the countries that have the U.S. reserve, U.S. dollar reserves in order to purchase oil. So every single country had their hand in the pie. And this pie was basically designed to collapse. It was designed to basically drop out from below, and everyone with their hand in it gets sucked down with them. So the entire world ends up falling into a giant financial hole, like a giant financial crisis. And then who knows what emerges out of that? Like, out of that creates the chaos that foments war, it foments conflict, and it allows these sociopaths, these oligarchs, to then implement a new system that inherently enslaves everybody, where there is no escape from whatever the new system is. So this collapse has been accelerated, in my opinion, and the opinion of others. It seems like this collapse has been accelerated. It's not happening on a timetable that is conducive to, what we would call whatever the globalist deep state. At the same time, you have the emergence of BRICS, which represents not one single currency, but a basket of currencies. And I think, I'm not a finance or econ guy, but as I understand what that means, is it means that every single player in this group is using their own currency, or using a specified currency to do all of their trade agreements. And that then builds up, that empowers their individual currency. Burkina Faso pegged their currency to the gold, and then now they're doing trades with Russia and with China, with all these different countries. Same with all these other African countries. They are improving the stature of their the position of their currency by engaging in all these bilateral agreements and not having their dollar pegged to the US dollar, which is, floundering right now. Even though it might still be considered, I don't know if it is or not, but it might still be considered the strongest specific currency in the world at the moment. The trajectory of it is obviously very, very bad and is not something that can be maintained. So I see BRICS as the thing that's going to step in and subvert what would be the economic collapse of the world, that then ushers in a one world government or a one world economic model that then, like central bank digital currency or some bullshit like that then allows them to control everybody, because then they can shut your bank account down if you don't follow their orders. And by BRICS coming in and saying, nope, we're going to use a basket of currencies. So you don't just have one currency to choose from. You have a number of currencies to choose from. And if for any reason one currency fails, you still have a bunch of other ones that you can rely on and pivot toward. And I think that, that's multipolar, and it gives you options, and options are always better in a free market.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And a free market is good to the degree that you actually have an honest playing field and you don't have saboteurs trying to lord over nation states who are actually in a healthy competition with each other to look out for their people, which is the point of sovereign nation states, is for the people to organize to institute types of government that apply laws that are based on natural law, thus in the defense of the well-being of the people who live there. Hence, every country should be looking out for their own best interest in a healthy society. But that also means, when you think about it for more than 3 seconds, that it's more in each country's self-interest to live in a neighborhood of other countries surrounding it who admire and appreciate their existence, while also engaging in competition to do something better for their people. So either, who could build the most effective productive system of industries, of who could have the most advanced types of rail lines, or do something that involves going outside of our limits of knowledge and produce more at the same time, right? Where you have more entrepreneurs who are going to be able to participate in the process, and that's healthy. And the problem, I think, free trade is a nuanced thing, because much of its application throughout most of human history up until now has been based upon dishonest British imperial and other imperial interests who promote it for their victims to become convinced that, oh, China, 19th century China, you signed on to a free trade agreement with Britain, which means you're not legally allowed to use the laws of protectionism to defend your people from opium that Britain controls. Because, by the way, we also took over India and forced them to just produce opium as part of our agreement with them, since we've destroyed their manufacturing, which is not part of the free trade agreement, but whatever, we destroyed their manufacturing, so that if they want to have national revenue, they got to make opium. That then we're going to, since we control the ports, we're going to make sure that goes for the majority of it into China. And if you notice that it's destroying your people and you try to put up trade barriers or tariffs or just block it, well, you're breaking the laws of free trade, meaning that's war. And then, a century of humiliation, turning China from like the most advanced country in the world in 1812. China was by heads over tails the most powerful country by GDP in the world, even outpacing Europe at that time. And then you could just see these graphs where as soon as the British get in there, it goes into a third world country. It spirals into chaos. Living standards collapse. By the time it's like, 1950, China's got through like so much disastrous civil war, internal conflict, a lot of it controlled by external forces tied to Anglo-American intelligence. And their life expectancy is like on average 39 years, 40 years of age. It's devastating. So all that to say, healthy free trade is, as you just pointed out, what we're seeing with these countries that actually want to develop their people and protect their people from the supranational financier death cult agencies that utilize international banking, international corporate influence to tell nations what they can or cannot do on behalf of whatever the World Trade Organization says or some other agency, which is bunk. So yeah, there's definitely new, healthier discussions happening. Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
For some reason.
Thank you. Yes, and the essence of free trade, the essence of a free market is options. You have to have options. If you don't have options, you don't have a free market. And so the idea that every single currency in the world would be completely dependent on the US dollar, while that has benefited the American public and the American middle class for quite some time, because we, as Patrick Gunnels puts it, we were cut in on the deal for a while. And so that kind of made it a lot, that made it very, very palatable to the American people. It's like, oh, this is great. Like we are benefiting from this to a certain extent. Ultimately, it wasn't beneficial to us, because then the tables got turned on us, and they were siphoning our life force out of us, using that system against us. So if you have options, you are in a free market. If you don't have options, you're not in a free market. And when you sign these you sign on to these trade regulations, these free trade agreements, as you pointed out, not the same thing as a bilateral trade agreement. Bilateral trade agreement is you and I go sit in a room and we hash out deals based on your interests and my interests, and that's it. And then when you have these free trade agreements, it's an organization that then says, all right, all the countries in this hemisphere, whatever it is, whether it's, like the Americas or the Pacific or the Atlantic or whatever it is, they all, like, in order for them to negotiate and do deals with one another, they have to go through us. We're the middleman. And if we don't approve your deal, you can't do it. And it's like, that's not free trade. That is bureaucracy. That's mercantilism, where this bureaucracy gets to pick who the winners and the losers are in the marketplace. And it's no good. It's garbage.
Yeah. That's what I appreciate. When Trump first came in 2016, the first thing he did, his first act in office, was passing an executive order to destroy the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which had been built up under Obama and Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And a lot of work had been put into getting nations, threatening them to sign on to this thing, which on the one hand isolated China, because it was based on everybody of the Pacific except China, who was supposed to sign on to this anti-nation state policy. It was known as the NAFTA of the Pacific, which did essentially, if you look at it, what NAFTA actually did do, since it was brought in 94 into North America, which was eliminate the legal rights for any country to participate in the economy, make no protectionism, it's illegal, and then give over the rights to private corporations to then sue governments if they infringe upon the rules of free trade that they signed onto. So you could actually sue a private corporation, a Monsanto or whatever, could sue via the World Trade Organization a sovereign nation state, which, like you said, that is a bureaucratic, tyrannical use of the thing, and they were going to do that in the Pacific. Again, giving private cartels the right to sue any country while also isolating China, and the fact that Trump made that murdering the TPP his first act of business, I think, was a good statement of intent on what he envisioned the U.S. to become and move into, as far as building up a trust with China again, actually reining in this supranational wannabe Bilderberger group, cartel power. And And that was good. And what do you got there? This is HR 2146. What's this?
Oh yeah. This is fascinating. So HR 2146. It's called Defending Public Safety Employees Retirement Act. Sounds nice, right? It was originally introduced. I think it was early 2015. Yeah, introduced April 2015. And the idea was it was like protecting the pensions of like first responders. Right? Sounds very noble.
Sounds great.
However, Mitch McConnell and his buddies in the Senate, they get their hands on this and they're like, we're going to make some changes here. We're going to add some language here. What language did they add? Trade Promotion Authority. This ended up becoming secretly a bill that promoted the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So this ended up, even though it maintained this title, it secretly was actually promoting the Trans-Pacific Partnership and advancing it and basically saying, yes, we're going to do this. Look where it was voted on. June 17th, 2015. That was the day before Donald Trump came down the escalator and announced his presidency. And you know who voted yes on this bill?
Who?
Ron DeSantis. Yeah. That's how I knew from day one. Because I had a buddy who figured all this out. And like 2 years ago, Brady, Warhamster and I, we used to be on like a group thread with a couple of really, really good researchers. And this one guy on the thread figured this out and he shared it. And I was like, dude, holy shit. And DeSantis. And so this was 2 or 3 years ago. I knew DeSantis was a bad guy because of this, because he signed on to the TPP the day before Donald Trump came down the escalator. And that's how I knew that he was 100% deep state. So anyway, I thought that was worth sharing. Did you see this? The barbershop thing.
No, I didn't.
Oh my God.
I did not see that.
Oh my God. You need to listen to this. This is good. You're going to love this. All right. If you can't hear the sound, let me know.
With all this extra revenue.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Into the country. So do you believe at some point in time we could find a way, once the country's back on its feet and getting enough revenue and paid off our debt, do you think it's possible to find a way to eliminate federal taxes?
There is a way.
And how do you feel about
it? In the old days, when we were a smart country, in the 1890s and all, this is when the country was relatively the richest it ever was. It had all tariffs. It didn't have an income tax.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we have income taxes, and we have people that are dying. They're paying tax, and they don't have the money to pay the tax. No, in the old days, 1890, 1880, we had so much money. They had to set up committees, blue ribbon committees, how to spend our wealth. We had no idea how to spend it with so much money. Then we went to the income tax system, and the rest is sort of history. But no, there is a way. I mean, if what I'm planning comes out, it's a great question, by the way.
Everyone could attain the American
sophisticated
dream.
Cat, you know.
Everyone could attain the American dream if it wasn't for the high cost, the burden of high taxes, and we're taxed at every step of the way.
Yeah.
When we make it, when we spend
regulations.
it.
And regulations. So I cut more regulations in 4 years than any other president by 4 times. Yeah, let's go. You would ask one question.
That's lovely.
William McKinley, isn't that who he's referring to?
That's exactly who he's referring to. He's probably the most cited president that Trump has referred to since 2016. It's William McKinley. That's his reference point for what the Republican Party was when it was viable and what he wants it to become. And McKinley, the assassinated McKinley, had a strong McKinley tariff. He was the last real living Civil War veteran, the last Lincoln Republican. Super important that he's bringing this back. And people think, oh yeah, federal income tax, that's the way it's always been. And it's like, no, we were much more wealthy and the blue ribbon committees. I've never heard Trump talk about that, but yeah, there was actually committees because the tariff is so good at creating a national revenue, because you're going to tax foreign goods because you want to favor and give an edge to building up the best of every sector that is possible within the United States, and every country should do that. So you want to create a situation where their workers are not going to be undercut domestically by foreign goods that might be made by slave labor abroad being flooded in, which is the case of America all the way even before the American Revolution. Every time Massachusetts wanted to build or create their own ironworks or their own horseshoes or clothing or textiles in the colonies from the 1670s. Every time this was attempted, you had the British Board of Trade kick in and immediately intervene, pass new artificial legislation banning whatever colony was trying to do that, and basically said, okay, no, the monopoly that gets control of everything is the London manufacturing base, and that's it. And did Britain ever actually, when they built up their manufacturing, especially after the 1750s, which is when you had the Manchester industrial boom, did they do it via free trade to themselves? Hells no. England didn't use free trade to themselves. They always used protectionism. They just demanded that everybody else that was supposed to be subverted and kept, under their shoes, like, which were supposed to be kept on the necks of every country, they had to do free trade. So it was never honest, and it was always based on the City of London as a supranational financial entity controlling the global rules, interfacing with the British East India Company as its own sort of private mercenary force with its own banking system or their own currency issuances as well. So it was always
its own military.
Yeah, their own friggin' military, and a revolving door with the government, with the Hellfire Club governments of England. So the whole thing was a giant mirage. It was never honest. So what Trump is bringing back, that's the key. America exploded in wealth and gave real value, anti-inflationary value to the growing dollar, because the dollar can grow. The U.S. population grew so many times over from the early colonies all the way till 1880. The population multiplied and multiplied again and again. And that was good. It wasn't a population like the Malthusians were always freaking out saying, oh, we're going to reach a demographic population, crisis, and then we'll have to depopulate. And no, that never happened, because America was always based on innovation, making new discoveries that always allowed for more potential that you could fill yourself into with a higher standard of living, with greater abundance, more aptitude, access to the mind. When you had machinery that could do more and more of the work of physical slave labor, all of a sudden people were liberated to use mind work instead of physical work. And mind work is still work. It's just now it's more creative, right? Now you can actually, and so the Luddites were wrong. All of these people who were running around, the Luddite cults, you heard about the Luddites?
I think so. The Luddites are the ones saying that progress is bad. Is that?
Yeah. It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same bedwetters that have always been there every single generation. The Luddites were the first generation that I know of that were going around in mobs, breaking looms and early steam
breaking
machines.
Breaking machines.
In the 90s, because it was going to steal their jobs. And it never happened. In fact, when you actually look in hindsight, whenever you apply a new technology or a new type of mechanization to the human productive powers of labor, you open up the door to all sorts of nonlinear consequences. New types of jobs are created every single time this has been done. It's never the opposite. It's never that humans are ever made irrelevant. If anything, we're made more relevant because it requires even more intellectual power and knowledge of human beings to operate the high tech, the nuclear power, which if you don't have real knowledge, if you're not very well educated and very well cultured in a society, you either won't be able to figure out how to build a nuclear reactor, which is very advanced, very difficult, or if you are given one and you have no knowledge or no proper cultivation, you'll misuse it. It'll have a meltdown or whatever. So to actually use greater power requires greater moral and intellectual cultivation. And there's this reciprocity between the metaphysics of the realm of thought, of mind and ideas and of morality and beauty, and the realm of physics, the physical world that we live in, right? That sustains us. And there's always this back and forth. And I think that's the thing, that was the key to America's success, and the world was looking at how it was that America, in World War II, there's these stories of these British soldiers for the first time meeting their American counterparts, and the Americans are like, "Wait, you guys still throw your pee out of in a bucket out of your window, and you don't have electricity in your houses?" And there's so many, and all of these Englishmen were like, "Wait, Americans have you got you could do your laundry not by hand. There's a machine. Why can't we?" And they started increasing their expectations. They're like, well, we didn't know that we could have these things. And they started demanding that all of a sudden this commercial tech be made available to improve their own quality of life too. So
yeah. Well, several things. Number one, when you build a nuclear reactor, you need two things. You need an incredible amount of. You need an incredible amount of steel work. So you need a lot of welders. You need a lot of steel workers in order to build it. You also need a ton of concrete. So you need a lot of concrete workers in order to pour the concrete for those. So you're talking about manual labor right there, and not only manual labor, but also skilled manual labor, welders and that sort of thing. I've been flying, and I'm not going to say too much because I don't want dox things, but I've been flying up to up north to work on an airport. We've been building an airport. And I will say this: Trump actually flew into the airport recently, but I won't say which airport it is, but it's a regional airport. But we're like renovating it, and so I've been going up there for meetings weekly. And I fly up there with one of the engineers who's a pilot in like a small little Cessna, and we fly like 7,000 feet. And if you ever flown at 7,000 feet, it's like you can see the cars on the road. You're very, very low to the ground, relatively speaking, to like an airliner. And you can see houses, you can see buildings. And I'll tell you this, flying like over Virginia and flying up the Chesapeake and flying at that height, you realize actually how sparsely populated the East Coast is. You think of the East Coast as being like everyone crammed together and like living on top of one another. Not at all. I mean, it's nothing but just pastoral farmland, like as far as you can see. And this is like, I'm talking about Virginia, which has been inhabited for 400 years. And it was the first place inhabited in North America by the European colonists. And there are a few other things I was tracking while you were speaking. You were talking about tariffs and McKinley. Yeah. So what Trump was talking about with the tariffs, like for those who didn't fully follow what he said there, is that he was saying that in the 1880s, 1890s, we didn't have federal taxes. We didn't pay federal taxes. We collected everything through tariffs. So people wanted to bring we had a booming economy. We had an awesome marketplace for consumers to buy things. And if you wanted to bring your goods to our markets, you had to pay a fee to gain entry to our markets. Whether you were an American who owned an American business and you were importing things to sell things to your neighbors, or if you were a foreign businessman who wanted to bring his wares to America, you had to pay a fee to bring that stuff in and gain access to the market, versus the guy down the street who's making it in his workshop and then peddling it out to the street to sell it. And that's a good thing. It's like all the money they were generating, there are so many people trying to bring their stuff to the markets to sell to the American consumer that alone was funding our federal government.
Amazing,
and we had so much money that they had to put committees together, blue ribbon committees, to figure out how to spend all the money because we had more money than we knew what to do with. And then Trump said, and then we had to go along and invent the income tax. And who did that? The Federal Reserve did that.
Yeah, which is essentially J.P. Morgan. I mean, the Federal Reserve Board,
the bankers.
It's entirely owned by these a handful of Wall Street banks and London banks. Yeah,
London and Prussian bankers created the Federal Reserve, and then they create the income tax. They put us into major world wars, which put us deep into debt. And they're like, in order to get us out of debt, guys, we have to implement a temporary income tax. It's gonna be temporary, and then of course it wasn't temporary at all.
Never.
And that is like the taxation system that they implemented after the World Wars is what enslaved our people. And that's what Trump was basically just explaining right there.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. Like I've spent a lot of time studying like the history of banking as well. And like one of the things that the sleights of hand that they did is that when they advanced it, originally like starting at the Jekyll Island discussions that were like run by the Rockefeller family and there are a few other key families, the Schiffs, the Warburgs were part of those meetings. But they made one case where they made it sound like the Federal Reserve was going to be originally like a national bank and thus like a tool of the actual constitutional component of the government, like which is the government. So having a bank that is like used by the people for the people is not a bad thing intrinsically. And we've seen that governments that actually care about their people, like in the case of China, where they've been able to build up like 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in a short period of time. They've been able to pull 1 billion people out of poverty, but they've been able to do it because they've been able to wield like 4 national banks that they didn't allow to be privatized, where all of the other countries during the Cold War and after allowed for their private bank, their banking system to be privatized, and to have like these central banks that were independent of the nation to be inserted. Even in Russia, that was the case, but everywhere. I think Iran was one of the few. North Korea was one of the few as well, with China, that said, no, we don't want to allow our bank to be privatized by agencies which are run by City of London BIS bankers or Wall Street. But so it gives you like a really great power to do big things fast and efficiently. But at the same time, like with the Fed, when it was created, it was built around this idea of it being an independent agency, that the government is too. They were like, well, now that we have it, or it, you know, if we allow it to be influenced by the effects of the elected government and the elected officials, well, then you can't have any type of stability or any type of, you know, sanity, because the governments might change as people feel differently year to year. So we can't allow that. We have to have professional technocrats whose job it is to do banking outside of and above the influence of the nation states. So they were able to say, once they got that in place as like totally separate from the government, now you can have nominally sovereign governments, but they don't have control of their own purse strings. If they don't control their own economic destiny, they're sovereign in name only. And now the Fed, with, you know, with all of its shadowy bureaucracy behind it, can say, well, you might want to audit us as far as even, you know, the representatives of the people. They might talk about it, but we're not really comfortable with that, so we're not going to allow that. And so they just stopped auditing the Fed. Or you might want to see what is it, the M13 reports, like the exposure to derivatives, or, you know, but we don't want to print those anymore, so we're not going to. And it seems like nobody seems to be able to like demand that they do.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Complete coup d'etat.
Yeah. Well, and one of the guys, like a different guy who was on that thread I mentioned before, I remember he shared. So basically, it's like the American people were far more educated, like in a real way back then, like 110 years ago than they are now. And so the public was smart. The public was like, no, we do not want a Federal Reserve. We oppose this. And so what JP Morgan did is he took a full page ad out. I think it was the New York Times, where this was like very, very, very malicious, like Machiavellian deceptive, where he pulled out a full page ad, and I forget what the exact conditions of it were, but I think what it was a full page ad that presented that the bankers actually opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve. So like JP Morgan and his friends acted like they were against it. And so then the public saw it and were like, well, wait a minute, if the bankers are against this thing, then it must actually be good. Like, because the people at the time hated JP Morgan. They hated the bankers. They recognized them as evil. And when they figured out that the bankers didn't want the Federal Reserve, people suddenly were like, oh, okay, well, maybe the Federal Reserve isn't that bad. Like, maybe this might actually be something that helps us.
Wow.
Yeah. And so like this guy shared the image of the full page ad, and I was like, oh my God, JP Morgan was such a scumbag. Like, he was such a slimy piece of shit. It doesn't surprise me at all that they put all of his opposition on the Titanic and killed them all. Like, of course they did. They're like, why wouldn't they have done that?
Right.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is that the neo Trotskyite, the Trotsky Republican Party has psyoped the conservative right, like the conservative America, into thinking that tariffs are somehow evil, that tariffs are anti-business, tariffs are anti-free market. Like, if you support tariffs, you are against business. You must be a communist because you want to put tariffs on these businessmen who want to bring their goods to our markets. You're a communist because you want to charge them a fee to come access to your markets. Meanwhile, they're using slave labor in the far-flung reaches of the world to build these products for nothing, and then they're going to come put them on the shelf next to your product and sell it for half the price and drive you out of business.
Yeah, exactly. I love the fact that you just pointed out this irony that the Trotskyists, who were Marxists, like they were communists, they were the ones who were advancing this argument. And if you look at it back in the early Soviet Union days, like after the Russian Revolution, the key guy to really like the international bankers, there was a lot of infighting, right? There wasn't like one Bolshevik thing. There were factions within factions. You had the Menshevik faction that Trotsky represented that merged with the Bolsheviks, but then you had like other you had the anarcho-syndicalists that were still following Mikhail Bakunin, and then you had the Kropotkin faction of anarcho-communists and communalists that were also like trying to vie for control. And so you had all of this, and then you had the Lenin faction that was working with Stalin, and they were fighting. So everybody was at cutthroat, you know, it was really knives out. But all that to say, when Trotsky got in, and he was the one who was interfacing with Jacob Schiff, he was the one in New York during the revolution, accumulating all the money that was being used to finance the thing by these Wall Street bankers. The same bankers that had just done the Federal Reserve just a few years earlier were the ones paying Trotsky.
He got also funding the Third Reich as well.
And funding what became the Third Reich. Yeah, that's right. They went on to do that too. And the Japanese fascists, they're the ones who were like pouring cash to militarize and turn the Japanese into this like, you know, Japanese version of an Aryanized. They had this whole Aryan theosophical mythos that they spread to the Japanese elite as well, around being descended from beings of light, you know, and not like the dirty Chinese on the mainland who were descended from monkeys, which is just a variation of what the Germans and, you know, the various fascist groupings believed as well, that they were the higher root race that Blavatsky had talked about.
The Zionists are now doing it to the Arabs. Yep.
Yeah. The Untermenschen are the Arabs. They're the dirty race, but the Kabbalistic, the higher spiritual beings are just of a higher plane. They're almost a different race. And so it's okay to kill the human, like it's okay to kill cows that are overpopulated. Why not kill also humans that are overpopulated or being, all that to say, this is what these bankers were doing when they were financing Trotsky. Now, when Trotsky gets back, he's in charge of setting up the economic miracle solution for post-revolutionary Russia, which in 1921, working with the same Wall Street bankers, becomes the new economy policy. And the new economy policy is free trade and privatize everything throughout the 1920s in Russia under Trotsky. That was the plan. That's where Armand Hammer, who later on runs Oriental Petroleum, which also oversees in the 70s and especially the 80s, the rape and pillage of China, under the same type of policy of free trade everything, but done under the Rockefeller oversight, right? Where you're just going to open up to basically, you're going to become cheap labor. Whatever labor you allow is going to be just cheap sweatshops. Everything else will be privatized that were state-owned to an accepted array of sociopathic social Darwinists who are whores to the higher powers. You know, they all want to just like be invited to the inner club, you know. And so they're the ones selected because they're so whorish to be the nominal faces that then buy up all of those state assets that they then grind into the ground, which breaks the nation eventually. It destroys the will of the people. It vaporizes it so that they become so malleable that they will accept, just for a bit of stability and food, policy changes that no sane moral human being would ever accept under normal circumstances whatsoever. And this is what was brought into Russia in the 90s, was the whole Trotsky new economy policy. And that's why Bush Sr. called the opening up of perestroika in 1992, he called it the Operation Hammer. Operation Hammer was the privatization of the Russian economy in the 90s. That was directly referencing Armand Hammer, who oversaw with Trotsky. He was known as like Lenin's banker. The privatization in the 20s. It was the same thing with the same effect. The only difference was you actually had a fight with some people who became smarter around Stalin and realized, wait a minute, this is going to totally destroy Russia totally, and kicked out Trotsky, so that Trotsky and all of his little underlings were either like purged, thank God, in Russia, or they left and reorganized themselves into the Frankfurt School. They were all of the ones working to create this new type of human, reorganize the educational systems in Hungary, which is what they did under George Lukács. They were brought into the U.S. and then they became the neocons. Like you said, this is what became James Burnham, Albert Wohlstetter, the guy who runs the Rand Corporation. The Burnham, who's the Trotsky's American lieutenant, who writes the Machiavellis. He's working with Leo Strauss. These guys create the neoconservative movement. They transform the McKinley Republicans into these neo-Trotskyite like ideologues, bringing in Austrian school economics, an alien ideology into like a virus into the Republican hosts that they just infuse into it, which becomes like this self-destructive, self-mutilating entity growing inside of the U.S. for the next Cold War period.
Yeah, and the Bauhaus school would be another example. The Bauhaus in Frankfurt School. Bauhaus was like the architecture school where they basically they were like, hey, if you finger paint and you write poetry and you do performance art, like performance theater, like a dance, that's how you become a great architect. And basically you do that for 7 semesters or however many semesters it is, and then in your final semester you finally get to practice. I'm not kidding. This is
did they make you dance? Did they make you do Bauhaus?
No. Fortunately, I just had to watch a documentary. I didn't have to do any of the dancing, but they actually had their curriculum was a spiral. It was a spiral. Like, I'm not kidding. It was a spiral. And then when you get to the center of the spiral, your final semester of school, you finally got to practice architecture, and then you would graduate and become an architect. I'm not kidding. That's how it was.
After they totally broke you with humanity, then finally you're qualified to go and actually do technical work.
Yeah. And like this documentary had all this footage of these people like rolling around on the ground, like on drugs. And, this is like the beatniks, the Bohemians, like in the 1920s, 1930s, like rolling around on the ground, like in drugs, like butt naked, like covering themselves in paint, like painting, the floor, like with their naked bodies. I mean, these people were complete, like they were like the proto hippies basically. And what ends up happening is that Hitler, is repulsed by all of this because he actually, he was like an architect painter. That's like what he painted was like architecture. And, whether he was actually repulsed by it or he was ordered to do it, because I kind of waffle back and forth on whether he was a useful idiot or whether he was an agent of these people. He drove all of these people. And like a guy I used to work for who was a total Palladian nerd, like meaning he was into the neoclassical architecture. That was like his jam. He always like cursed Hitler because he was like, Hitler had the chance to round these people up and exterminate them before they brought these awful ideas to America. I mean, he was saying it like tongue in cheek, but he was like, all this awful architecture that you see in America now and in the West, Hitler basically he scared all these people like to America. And so they leave Germany, they leave like the Bauhaus school. And before they even land in America, they already have their jobs lined up where they're all deans of the top schools across the country, all the Ivy League schools, Chicago, everywhere. Wow. These people, these teachers from the Bauhaus school instantly became deans of the #1 architecture school. And they went there and they were like, we're going to teach people how to make the ugliest buildings you've ever seen with the smallest windows that are completely inhuman, that hate humanity. And it's going to make you hate yourself. It's all about demoralization. And what you've been living through now for the past 4 or 5 years, 10 years really, is demoralization. Like the minute that Bruce Jenner came out and said, I'm a woman, that was like when the demoralization campaign really began and went into high gear. And it's been about breaking your will. Because like you just said, if you can break the will of the people, they will accept the most absurd and degenerate ideas imaginable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's terrible. Like you look at some of the beautiful architecture from the 19th century and even into the 1920s, even, but especially in the 19th century. And there's really a sense of dignity. There's like embroidery built into the bas-reliefs that, there's a certain sense of both aesthetics, but also like utility. There's both. It's not just utility, like these ugly buildings in the 70s of these like Stalinist, concrete, like I went to, that's my universities that I went to were just these concrete gray structures that just are soul killing. And then of course you get this like counter reaction at some point of people who are feeling so suffocated by that hyper utilitarian culture of boxiness that they then branch out and become like hyper experimental. Like they just make the most randomized contemporary, design buildings that have no utility. They just look stupid. and you like lose the balance of like, well, maybe both, aesthetics, beauty, and usefulness can coexist in a school that looks beautiful, where it should be, because it should be sacred. Like, kids should feel like they're actually doing something sacred by learning and preparing their identities to be part of the adventure of being a human, right? As this ongoing journey. That should be like a really, like, yeah, just gorgeous. And and the Vitruvian Man, right? The golden section, which is
yeah. So I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up at this point.
Yeah.
So the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci. What this was actually about, I'm sure everyone's seen this image before. What this is actually about. So what Da Vinci used to do is he used to illegally get cadavers from wherever he could get them from, the morgue. Sometimes he'd dig them up from graveyards, like whatever, and then he'd dissect them, and that was totally against the law in his day because of like the laws that the Vatican had in place. It was against the law to study like the human like science, basically, to this extent. But by doing this, what he determined is he realized that he came up with this theory that the human body was actually a scale model of the known world, and that like the universe and the world and everything that you see in the world, like the way that our lungs and the brachial systems of our lung looks like a tributary from a river, and like your veins are like the way that like roots grow in the ground. He would draft all this, he would chart it, he would diagram it, and he basically figured out that the human body literally is like God created the world and the universe, and then he was like, I'm going to take all of this, I'm going to put it into a living form, and that's what a human being is. And so that's what that's literally what this diagram represents, is that he wanted to see, can you create a circle and a square that have the exact same area using only a compass to make the circle and a straight edge to make the square. And he determined that you could. So this square and this circle right here have the exact same area. And you notice that they also happen to be, a human being spread out. And so the reason he called it the Vitruvian Man is because it was based on the writings of this ancient Roman architect named Vitruvius. And so Vitruvius is this guy who figured out many centuries before, like 1,500 years before Da Vinci, he figured out that there were these secrets about how he unlocked this knowledge about how you could build buildings to actually like inspire your soul and elevate your thinking and elevate the way that you think. And he wrote all this down in these volumes that then architects would use to make the buildings. And that's why when you go look at all these buildings in ancient Italy, they're so amazing and they're so like awe-inspiring. For example, like in ancient Greece before Rome, they figured out that if you taper your columns, it corrects this effect that occurs, because if you make the columns perfectly straight, when you look at them from a distance, the columns end up looking like they're concave. So what you do is you actually make them, you taper them, make them a little fat, and so that way it like corrects the the visual tricks that your eyes play on you. They figured that stuff down to like the micrometer of like how you build a building to look right when you're looking at it from all these different angles. Because otherwise, if you just build it the way that you would think about, modeling it in 3D, when you look at it in perspective, because of like the way our eyes are formed, it looks weird and it looks odd. The point being is that this is like almost esoteric knowledge that these guys figured out, and then they put it into volumes. They passed it down. Other people added to it. And that's why for for thousands of years, we knew how to build amazing buildings, because these guys figured it out and then wrote it down.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible.
Yeah. It's glorious. It's really glorious. I was just thinking as you were talking, like I was watching a documentary on the attempted rebuilding of the Parthenon in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And it was incredible because they failed. Like just to get across, like even though our technology I know some people might say our technology was so much better thousands of years ago. I don't buy it, but I think our technology is better today, but our knowledge has fallen far. It's become much more inferior to the type of appreciation and intellectual rigor that people, especially the city builders, had in the past. And they tried rebuilding the Parthenon in the 1940s and 50s, and they screwed it all up. They started having to like put on, like they were trying to, because all of the columns, you know, the columns had these pieces, right? These segments that each one is built in, and there's dozens and dozens of columns. The thing itself is built up according to the golden section.
Yep.
So they're already using the golden section, and they and a bunch of the columns broke down. Or no, that's not it. It's this one here.
You can
right?
see, yeah,
This one here on the left. And so the columns behind it broke down, and they tried to rebuild a bunch of the other ones, and they couldn't figure it out. And it was only when they realized that there was no straightness anywhere, that they didn't realize that the Greeks that built it, like you said, had taken into account the human optics of the thing, so that everything was slightly curved, so that every place you stood as a person watching, you always had the same golden section proportions that were being reflected, that took perspective into consideration, and no two blocks in any column were the same. They were all slightly different to make that all work. It's all curved slightly. And yeah, we screwed it all up. We were like we're drilling things in to just force it all together, and yeah, we blew it.
Yeah. If you pull that back up, actually, you can see the taper. So see how the columns like get fatter as they go down to the bottom. That's what I was talking about. Right. There's an Italian word for it. It's called like escalatura or something like that. Somebody in the chat will probably know what it is, but that's what it is. And so, like you said, every single thing was designed like with that in mind. And so they would compensate for the fact that the human brain almost can't even perceive it, so that they would fix it so that the human eye was seeing it the way it was meant to be seen, as opposed to building it quote unquote the correct way, like in physical reality, but then our eyes aren't going to view it the correct way. It was all about the human experience. Genius. Like, these people were genius, and this knowledge was literally taken by these people, these communists who came out of Germany and were instantly given the highest levels of education in America and in Europe. And they literally took those books and they burned them. And they said these are filthy ideas. We have to move away from it. And then we're going to move towards these dehumanizing ideas that are all about destroying the soul and making people feel absolutely empty inside. And that's what modern architecture is all about, is about basically hating humanity. And a lot of modern art is really about shock value and about making people uncomfortable and making people anxious. It's like that's what a lot of artists go for these days. And it's the same thing in architecture. But I wanted to just share this because you were talking about George Bush, and Putin definitely said this today. He said, "We are creating a new world order," which I felt like the second I read that, I was like, he is trolling the shit out of the deep state when he said that, because of what that's literally George Bush's words. We are creating a new world order. So it's fantastic. I view that as just him throwing the middle finger up at the State Department and saying, yeah, we're doing this.
Yeah, I actually had a number of followers send that to me as proof that Putin is evil. And that my position, it's like it's pretty much. I get a little frustrated, but my position is really that nominalism will screw up your mind, because like reality is more than the words or the labels we attach to phenomenon. It's not that at all. There's a context that infuses meaning into words, and the context is everything. So that's the reality. And if you look at, well, what is Putin doing as far as policy, cultural policy, economic, security, foreign policy, how is he thinking philosophically? That will help you understand how is discussions of a new order, how does the meaning of what that word mean, or that term, those three words together, how is it different based upon what is happening in Eurasia, which involves massive increases of abundance, people being pulled into higher states of culture. There's an actual like utilization of the national power to crack down on Luciferian grooming of children in schools into, post-genderism, the effeminization of men in Russia and in China in the media has been banned. Video game addiction has been banned. So you've got like a crackdown on all of the consequences of what you were referring to, this, several generations into the Frankfurt School that was brought into all of these American elite universities, New School, Columbia, Chicago, Stanford, like all of these American universities that received all of these nihilistic, anti-human bastards who were like the vanguard of what you described, the Bauhaus movement, the Theodore Adornoite groupings that were trying to do sex ed to kids with, that was George Lukács as the minister, the Bolshevik cultural minister of Hungary in 1919 till he got kicked out, and then was brought into the United States. But they're all from the Frankfurt School. A lot of them happened to be Jewish, and they were fascist. They wanted to join the Nazi Party, but there was this whole anti-Semitism thing, so they had to get out and do their fascist thing elsewhere. And now we've got several generations later, the consequence is nobody believes in truth. Everything is based on emotions.
Moral relativism.
Relative. Yeah, moral relativism, cultural relativism. The idea of truth being right or wrong is just a binary thing that no smart person should respect. In fact, there's infinite genders. And as soon as you let that genie out, I mean, now that thing is run amok. It's a drag genie, right? And it's these countries that are labeled communist evil countries, like that's what people have been indoctrinated to think of. Oh, China's evil Chi-Coms. It's all of our problems are caused by the evil Chi-Com infiltration of America. And I get this so much. And it's like they are destroying the entire edifice of the Frankfurt, cultural Marxist brainwashing operation, which has worked hard to destroy their own countries too. They're only doing something about it. Russia's doing something about it. And so, yeah, the new order, there is going to be a new order, whether people like it or not. We're going to get a new system. It will happen because the current system was hijacked and turned into a time bomb. It's going to blow as a time bomb must blow. So the thing is, will we allow it to blow up onto us and kill we the people, or are we going to like focus it so that the pain is absorbed entirely by those who manufactured this crisis, being these Wall Street too big to fail banks and their European counterparts, in order to then bring us into some form of cooperative alliance with nations that want abundance. They want to have peace on earth based on cooperation. Is that what we're going to do instead? Which I think the terms of the elections going forward here. And what do you got there? This is a video of
well, I just want to point out like to what you just said about the people sending you this and saying this is proof that Putin is evil. Let me demonstrate. I want to demonstrate real quickly how good Putin is and these people are at trolling, because I'm going to show you how they're trolling. This is actually, if you go read the news brief today, I wrote about this in the news brief today. So this is a video that came out over the weekend. This guy claims to be a Chinese mercenary fighting with Russia as a Chinese mercenary. He's not like part of a national military. He's a Chinese mercenary fighting with the Russians in Ukraine against the Ukrainians. And he claims that 153 Chinese nationals have been killed alongside a bunch of North Koreans. And he said, yes, North Koreans are here in Ukraine fighting and dying. May or may not be true, but that doesn't matter at this point. What matters is the narrative. So then we get this comes out, this video of these North Korean troops, actual North Korean troops arriving at a Russian military base to do some training. And the Russian who's filming it is like, you all are some very, very handsome allies. And he's obviously joking and like trolling. And he said, I think this will be, I hope this will be the very quick end of the war now that our very handsome allies from North Korea are here. So the military base where they were doing it is here. It is in the far east, like right next to Korea. So yeah, nowhere near Ukraine, but wow. This guy was trolling. All right. Politico then comes out with this is last week. Politico comes out with,
oh my
this
God.
article saying Putin is amassing North Koreans. I mean, this was a narrative that they really ran with this.
Wow.
Zelensky said that Russia is assembling a quote coalition of criminals. So now I am now referring to the Sovereign Alliance as like the coalition of criminals. That's like their WrestleMania name. And so they're calling it this is what they're calling it. They're calling it the Bitchute Battalion, like the 3,000 North Koreans that are fighting in Ukraine. So then, in response to that, this gets posted to Reddit. This was this afternoon. Today, this is Tuesday afternoon. And this guy posts this to Reddit. This is like a Reddit moderator. He posted to the Ukraine-Russia report. His name is Fruitsilla. And he says, here's a photograph of the Special Bitchute Brigade featuring Kim Jong-un. And so these are like, I mean, these guys appear to be North Korean. They're wearing like North Korean patches on their uniform. They're holding up this flag of Putin and Kim Jong-un shaking hands. And they're standing in front of this Soviet monument in Western Russia. So it's like maybe these guys actually are in Western Russia, like near Ukraine. We don't know. But and then like I also point out that this dude right here is actually indeed pretty handsome. So like these people are trolling the shit out of the West. Like they are trolling the shit out of Politico. They're trolling the shit out of the deep state, and they're very, very good at it. Like they know exactly what to say and they know exactly what to put out there in order to get these people worked up into a frenzy. So they will write articles like this. And that's why Putin would come out and say something like, I'm creating a new world order, because he knows that language is going to elicit a response from a certain group of people that he wants to elicit a response from. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's very, very smart. And ultimately it does get back to kind of bringing everything full circle to the to this, which is Iran and Saudi Arabia announced today that they're going to do joint naval drills. And I think it's really important to talk about this because, the narrative that's out there, and I'm talking to all these people behind the scenes who are super frustrated because they think that Saudi Arabia and the Arabs are all in league with Israel and that they're basically selling out all the other Muslims, and they're basically working with Israel to start a huge war in the Middle East and to destroy attack Iran. And I that from the very beginning, I said MBS is playing up the long con against Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is on his hit list because Netanyahu was obviously part of 9/11, and that was an event that had a very profound effect on MBS personally as a 16-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. And he wants revenge against these people. And so now that you have Israel about to attack Iran ostensibly, you had that intelligence leak that, seemed to have subverted for at least a moment. Now you have MBS coming out and saying, I'm going to do joint naval drills with Iran, who 5 years ago, MBS would have gone to war with Iran easily. He was ready to go to war with Iran. Now he's going to do military drills with Iran right in the face of Netanyahu, as he is the guy who is single-handedly, along with Jordan and the UAE, making sure that all the food and supplies and the goods are getting to Israel so the Israeli people are fed and don't starve to death. It's amazing. I mean, basically, this is 5D chess, how to basically subvert a bunch of warmongers who are absolutely dead set intent on starting World War III. And this is how
that's so key. And I mean, right now, a lot of people are also, I think, very cynical about the fact that, and last time I checked, MBS didn't show up in Kazan for the BRICS summit, right? And he's still not officially accepted the invite to join the BRICS, as far as I understand it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Because today he was meeting with the Jordanian king, King Abdullah, in Riyadh. So yes,
yeah. So this is important just to keep people's minds sort of grounded in the nuance and the actual backdoor decisions and policy making that's been going on, because you have this is a big deal that you actually are in discussions, advanced discussions for joint naval exercises between two what have been historically arch nemesis that are now really moving in the same beat frequency, on the same page, Very, very important. And I'll also, on that note too, first day of the BRICS summit, I'll just show this because we didn't talk about it, but just to point it out, we were talking about India and Pakistan healing all of the different divide to conquer tactics that the British had set up when they created Pakistan before the British left. They made sure that there'd be inter-ethnic fighting and balkanization of a once integrated like society. Well, that was why they created this Muslim-dominated Pakistan in the first place. But so you have that healing going on, and at the same time, the India-China schism. The first day of the summit, Xi Jinping meets with Modi today, and they immediately resolve the border conflict. This is sort of a bit of a celebration, a military celebration of Chinese and Indian troops at this border in the north of India, right next to Tibet, which is thousands of square kilometers of disputed territory, which has everything to do with the British Empire arbitrarily going in when they had dominance over India, creating artificial boundary conditions with Tibet, totally artificial. And China wasn't even invited to the discussion about like whether they would even agree on these boundary conditions. And today it's been used to try to create war between India and China. And in the 60s, it did actually manifest into a border war. And in 2000, I think, May or March or something of 2000, there was a shooting conflict. Soldiers on both sides died, especially I think 20 Indian soldiers, but I also think the Indians kind of instigated it. And that overlaps also with Pakistan, which claims some of that as their own, and India claims some of that, and China claims some of that. And, the oligarchs in the West have been laughing, trying to use this as a way to break up and weaken the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as the BRICS, which involve both of those countries, India and China, as core, foundation stones. So the fact that they've been able to resolve this on day one of the Kazan BRICS summit, super big deal there too. And I think it has a lot to do with why is Canada constantly burning all of their diplomatic bridges with India and trying to blame Modi as the big bad new supervillain to add to the pantheon of the axis of evil of North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia.
The coalition of criminals.
Yeah. with information that nobody's ever seen. They're acting like it's a fait accompli, proven fact that Modi oversaw demanded the murder of this Sikh Khalistani separatist in Vancouver. Nobody has seen any evidence. It's all secret information and secret reports from CSIS, which is sort of the Canadian version of the CIA, which all of a sudden is being heralded in the Canadian press, both mainstream as well as the ultra. I'm in Canada, for those who don't know. I'm in Canada, so I'm extra exposed to this stuff. Even the alternative media that's typically like anti-Great Reset, anti-tyranny, they are so like the conservative leaning alt media. Even they, Rebel News and others, are printing pro-CSIS propaganda without ever seeing any evidence that India is actually trying to subvert freedom and democracy. And it's great that Justin Trudeau has done what he did to kick out and shut down relations with India. And they do the same thing with China. Like there's currently inquiries where the former director of CSIS is testifying as a patriot of the Canadian people that there's secret evidence that China interfered in the Canadian elections in 2019 and 2021 to get their puppet Justin Trudeau into power. And it's like, again, it's all secret. Nobody has seen anything. Nobody will talk about what the evidence is. If it's so big, just show the world what is this evidence, but they'll never do it because they're making it all up. And because they don't want people to actually look at what is the foreign agency that's taking control of Canada? Because there is one, and it's not in the Kremlin, and it's not in India, and it's not in China, and it's not in Venezuela, and it's not in Iran, but there is one. And it's not a nation. It's something else.
Yeah. Well, you know what that sounds a lot like you talk about the alternative media picking it up and running with it. That sounds a lot like the Jamal Khashoggi psyop, where the CIA presented absolutely no real evidence. They just said, "Hey, you got to trust us. We've done the research. We've done the reports. It was definitely MBS. It was definitely Saudi Arabia." And guess who picked up and ran with all that? All the conservative, the alternative conservative media, because it was yet another Muslim psyop. It was like, hey, well, we are talking about a Muslim here, so we know how evil those guys are, right? I mean, like remember 9/11? Remember that? Remember 9/11? Like, yeah, like God. And it's like, and then October 7th happens last year. And I remember in real time sitting there being like watching everyone lose their minds. And I'm like, dude, I feel like it's September 12th, 2001 all over again, where everyone, it's like we forgot what happened. And we're just like falling back into our old modes of thinking. And and then, but like going back to the Canada India thing, you know, in 2022, 2 years ago, they were talking about like an actual border conflict erupting between Canada and India. Like that was like a real thing. Like they were talking about like Khan Inc. and all them were talking about the conditions forming that maybe World War III would break out, and it would be, and India would be on a 2-front war with Pakistan and Canada fighting 2 fronts, despite
China.
I'm sorry, like in India fighting Pakistan and India fighting China. Yes, like on 2 different fronts, and that would become World War III. And despite BRICS and all that happening in the background, it's like that was actually the side, like the narrative that was being advanced. And it's crazy, man. So look where we are now. Like we're seeing like peace is breaking out. We're seeing all of these ancient feuds, these ancient rivalries, you know, powers that have been around for a lot longer than the West, putting aside their differences, bearing the hatchet. Doesn't mean that like all is forgotten and forgiven, but it's a first step. It's a good first solid step towards peace. They are choosing peace while the West is choosing war, and the difference, like the contrast, could not be more clear than it is right now in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a really, like, it is a healthy white pill way of approaching the world that we're going into, because there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of uncertainty. So it's really good to keep these historical universal principles that we know have shaped history for the good, that the oligarchy is afraid of when human beings tap into this mode of thinking and feeling and act accordingly. The oligarchy has always lost its hold over the masses, over the world that it wishes to be kept enslaved and under feudal controls of a hereditary elite. So really important that we really meditate on and immerse our minds in a study of that process. What is the nature and structure of those sets of ideas that have strengthened humanity, have brought us more into harmony with God's creation as a part, probably the most important part of God's creation, that can self-consciously reflect upon that universe the way Da Vinci was doing by looking at the golden section in the microcosm and discovering that it's also organized in galaxies. You still see these proportions, you know, when you stir your milk into your coffee cup and you look at these pictures of beautiful galaxies, which maybe are being unfolded over a longer physical space-time of a continuum. So it takes maybe, you know, millions of years for a certain motion to happen on that level, then whereas just maybe a couple of seconds in your coffee cup. But it's the same principles operational, the same expression of the golden section in life, which, you know, resonates with a certain beauty. You see the same thing in music, right? There's you could find certain musical proportions that also have the golden section, which are harmonious. They create a resonance with the soul when expressed in the form of a Beethoven symphony, or a Mozart requiem, you know, and or a Bach cantata. It's something which elevates the conscience. It creates better memory power, better aesthetical appreciations, and, you know, without a sense of beauty and ugliness, it's opposite, the absence of beauty, right? Without that sense, it's much more difficult for the mind to discern right from wrong, or a lie from a truth, an invisible intention which is beautiful, or an invisible intention which is ugly. It's very difficult for somebody to discern without a cultivated sense internally of what is actually higher beauty versus something that is maybe just appealing to our eros, our lower order material, you know, sensual passions, which may or may not be good. You know, if it's devoid of purpose, then we could see how often that corrupts and destroys lives, as the victim, or the people who got invited to Snoop Dogg's, or no, not Snoop Dogg, sorry, not Snoop Dogg, P. Diddy's parties, or an Epstein Island escapade, discovered so quickly how how that could really destroy their humanity by appealing.
Yeah.
And I was thinking one last thing too on that little rant, this association that it always tends to happen when we chat. Hold on one second. I just realized one thing. Yeah, okay. I was thinking as you were talking about, and I know it's getting late and you probably have to go to bed, but anyway, the conditioning you were given in school before you went into actual architecture, and how much worse it is even now for younger people who are expected to, be broken of their fundamental human qualities before they're allowed to practice their art or their science or whatever technique they were wanting to specialize in, but I was wondering if that's also something that occurs within the frat programs, like the Greek letter clubs all over the sororities, fraternities that are disproportionately massive in the United States. We got them in every country, but really it's grown out of proportion in the United States since the 19th century, and it usually involves hazing, where you just are induced to do the most degenerate stuff going into it, and then after you're a senior, you're then overseeing as the abuser the new batch of young people who are then being broken of their dignity. And then I can only imagine going in, whether you're practicing law or medicine or engineering, whatever you're going into, you won't have that spark that you need to have if you're gonna go with this mindset of a Da Vinci or another type of great scientist to make real discoveries and have that real love and passion for the art and for humanity that you should have if you're going to contribute something in the higher level, to the field.
Yeah, no, very, very astute. That's a good thought. Definitely a good thought. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we probably should. Do we have another ad we need to do?
Oh, damn, there is. Okay, so let's do that. Let's read another ad, then we'll
do
just
the ad.
Out
do the ad, and then we do have a boost that I'll read. I'll do that after the ad. Yeah,
that's a good incentive to stay on for the ad, and then wait till we read the boost. So here it is, the ad from MyPillow.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra MyPillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic MyPillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen-size MyPillow for just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use MyPillows for only $9.88. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size MyPillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
All right.
Awesome. Sweet. All right. Well, yeah, we have one from October 9th. I think we missed it last week, but Fernie, 65, $20. I can't believe I listened to a history show. This is my favorite Badlands show. You two are so good and feed off each other. A great combination. I will continue to be a student here. Thanks for all the great info and ideas. Well, thank you, Fernie. We appreciate that.
Very cool.
And obviously this is pre-recorded, so we won't be we can't read rants, but I will do my best to collect whatever rants that may pop up on the live stream, and we will read them next week. Everyone, please stick around because don't stick around. I'm going to be doing an interview at 2:00 today with Joe Rambo, who's a friend of Badlands. On his channel. I will drop the link in the comments so that y'all can get that.
You mean in 15 minutes from now?
Yeah, 15 minutes from now, I'm going to be doing an interview with Joe Rambo. He asked me to come on to talk about the Middle East, so probably we'll be going over a lot of the stuff that we've covered over the past year on this show. But it'll be nice to bring it to somebody who's eager to kind of like digest it and hear maybe some of the information for the first time. But yeah, Matt, anything you have going on coming up?
There's so many wheels spinning. I guess, yeah, people could watch on today's episode. I was just informed of the Dell Big Tree High Wire. Oh no, wait, this is Wednesday, so it's going to be Thursday, I guess. My in-studio broadcast that was recorded about a month ago, that's going to be released, so people could watch that on the High Wire. Also, the new documentary we just put out. There's two documentaries. One is the Arctic Theater for War or Cooperation, which I just got informed will be running on One America News very soon, probably before the election, I hope. So that's also something to keep in mind. If you haven't watched it yet, go check that out. It's on CanadianPatriot.org, or just wait until it comes out on One America News network. And lastly, the aliens, the hidden hand behind UFOs. Cynthia and I, we just finished and we released episode 3 of the hidden hand behind UFOs, going through the new age of the sorcerers, MK Ultra, the rise of the drug culture, Carl Jung as well, playing a very big role advising Alan Dulles on psychological warfare. Carl Jung being an OSS operative who plays a big role in the rise of the UFO cult during the 1950s. And so we exposed that, taking it all the way to the present, because we're going to be getting a lot of PSYOP. It's not just Russia and China and Iran that we're being told to be afraid of, but they're also going to be bringing out more and more UFO material. Probably also holographic technology is going to be utilized with Project Bluebeam increasingly. So they're trying to drive people crazy, basically. And so we're trying to nip that in the bud while we can, and that's now available for free to watch on CanadianPatriot.org. So I just announced those 3 items for those watching.
Sweet.
All right.
Awesome.
So till next week. Thank you, Gordon.
All right, man.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
everyone.
day. See y'all next week.